Ancient historians called her the most ruthless woman in Roman history. She allegedly poisoned her husband, Emperor Claudius, eliminated anyone who threatened her power, and controlled the Roman Empire through manipulation and murder. But was Agrippina really a monster, or was she a victim of misogynistic propaganda? Archaeological evidence and careful source analysis reveal a more complex truth. Before diving into this historically documented investigation, if you enjoy learning about real historical figures through critical analysis of ancient sources, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these complex stories of powerful women together, questioning how gender bias shaped historical narratives. Understanding Agrippina the Younger requires first understanding how ancient Roman historians portrayed powerful women, the literary tradition they inherited, and the cultural values they upheld created systematic biases that shape every account we have of her life. Our primary sources for Agrippina's life and career come from three main historians: Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio. All three were male members of the senatorial class, writing decades or centuries after her death, and all operated within a cultural framework that viewed female political power as fundamentally illegitimate and dangerous. Tacitus, writing in the early 2nd century AD, about 50 years after Agrippina's death, provides our most detailed account in his Annals. His portrait of Agrippina is complex but ultimately negative, emphasizing her ambition, cruelty, and sexual manipulation. He describes her as having all the ruthlessness of a man without any of the traditional female virtues. This characterization reveals the double bind faced by powerful Roman women. Traditional feminine virtues, modesty, obedience, domesticity, were incompatible with political power. Any woman who successfully wielded power necessarily violated gender norms and could therefore be portrayed as monstrous or unnatural. Suetonius, writing slightly later in the 12 Caesars, focuses more on scandal and sensational stories. His accounts of Agrippina emphasize alleged incest with her son Nero and various poisonings, but he provides less detailed analysis of her political maneuvering. His treatment follows patterns typical of ancient biography, where moral condemnation took precedence over psychological nuance. Cassius Dio, writing in the early 3rd century, nearly 200 years after Agrippina's death, draws heavily on earlier sources, but adds his own interpretations, reflecting the concerns of his own era. His account portrays Agrippina as the archetype of the dangerous, politically ambitious woman whose unnatural behavior threatens social order. Modern feminist historians have noted that these ancient sources employ consistent rhetorical strategies when describing powerful women. They are routinely accused of sexual manipulation, poisoning, a feminine form of murder, and exercising illegitimate influence over male rulers. These accusations appear so frequently that they seem to represent literary conventions rather than historical evidence. This doesn't mean Agrippina was innocent of all accusations or that she was simply a victim of slander. Rather, it means we must read our sources critically, recognizing that the language used to describe her actions is heavily colored by gender bias, and that similar actions by men would have been described very differently. Agrippina the Younger was born on November 6, 15 AD, in the Roman colony of Oppidum Ubiorum, modern Cologne, Germany, during her father's military campaigns. She was the first daughter and fourth child of Germanicus and Agrippina the Elder, placing her at the very center of Roman imperial politics from birth. Her lineage was extraordinary, even by imperial standards. Through her father Germanicus, she was the great-granddaughter of Augustus, Rome's first emperor. Through her mother, She was descended from both Augustus and Mark Antony. This combination of bloodlines made her and her siblings among the most prestigious members of the imperial family. The Julio-Claudian dynasty that ruled Rome from Augustus through Nero was characterized by complex family relationships, frequent adoptions, and strategic marriages designed to consolidate power and ensure succession. Understanding these family connections is crucial for comprehending Agrippina's later political maneuvering. Her father Germanicus was one of Rome's most popular generals, beloved by the army and the common people. Ancient sources consistently describe him as handsome, brave, and possessing the personal qualities that Romans admired in leaders. When he died suddenly in 19 AD under suspicious circumstances, widespread rumors blamed Emperor Tiberius for his death. Agrippina the Elder, her mother, was equally notable, a strong-willed woman who openly defied Tiberius and accused him of murdering her husband. This political opposition would have disastrous consequences for the family. Between 29 and 33 AD, Tiberius arrested Agrippina the Elder and two of her sons, who all died in custody under mysterious circumstances. The young Agrippina witnessed the destruction of her family during these purges. She was about 14 when her mother was exiled, and 18 when news came of her death. Her brothers Nero Caesar and Drusus Caesar also died as prisoners, leaving only Agrippina, her sisters Drusilla and Livilla, and her younger brother Gaius, who would become Emperor Caligula, as survivors. This traumatic childhood shaped Agrippina's understanding of imperial politics. She learned that proximity to power could be fatal, that emperors eliminated threats preemptively, and that survival required political acumen and ruthlessness. These lessons would guide her throughout her life. Archaeological evidence from imperial palaces where she spent her childhood reveals the material luxury that accompanied political danger. Frescoes, mosaics, and architectural remains show that even as her family was being destroyed, they lived in unprecedented splendor, creating the contrast between public magnificence and private terror that characterized life at the imperial court. When Agrippina's brother Gaius became Emperor Caligula in 37 AD, the surviving children of Germanicus suddenly found themselves at the center of power. Caligula initially honored his sisters, granting them unprecedented privileges and including them in official ceremonies in ways that violated traditional Roman gender roles. Ancient sources describe complex and controversial relationships between Caligula and his three sisters. Suetonius and Cassius Dio both accuse Caligula of incestuous relationships with all three, though these accusations must be evaluated critically, given the pattern of using incest allegations to discredit political enemies. What is historically documented is that Caligula granted his sisters honors typically reserved for emperors or their wives. They received the privileges of Vestal virgins, including reserved seating at games, were included in the annual vows of loyalty taken by magistrates, and appeared on coins alongside the emperor. These unprecedented honors made them politically visible in ways no Roman women had been before. However, this elevated status proved dangerous when Agrippina became involved in a conspiracy against her brother in 39 AD. The plot, led by Caligula's brother-in-law Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, may have aimed to assassinate the emperor and install Lepidus as his successor, with Agrippina as empress. When the conspiracy was discovered, Caligula responded with characteristic brutality. Lepidus was executed, and Agrippina was exiled to the Palatine Islands, a desolate location off the coast of Italy traditionally used for banishing political enemies. Ancient sources describe her exile as harsh. She was stripped of her property and forced to live in primitive conditions. Even more cruelly, Caligula reportedly forced Agrippina to personally carry Lepidus's ashes back to Rome before her exile, a psychological torture that demonstrated his power over her. This punishment suggests that whatever her involvement in the conspiracy, Caligula viewed it as particularly serious betrayal. Agrippina spent approximately 2 years in exile on the Palatine Islands. Archaeological surveys of the islands have identified ruins that may have been used for housing political exiles during this period, though no definitive connection to Agrippina has been established. Her exile ended only with Caligula's assassination in January 41 AD. The new Emperor Claudius, her uncle, recalled her along with her surviving sister Livilla. This recall marked the beginning of Agrippina's rise to unprecedented power, but it also demonstrated a pattern that would characterize her entire career: survival through political skill combined with willingness to take extreme risks. Agrippina's first 2 marriages reveal how aristocratic Roman women could accumulate political capital and wealth even within the constraints of a patriarchal system that officially excluded them from direct power. Her first marriage, arranged around 28 AD when she was about 13, was to Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, a member of one of Rome's most ancient and distinguished aristocratic families. The Domitia Ahenobarbus had been consuls and held other high offices for generations, giving Agrippina connections to traditional senatorial nobility. Domitius Ahenobarbus himself was, by all ancient accounts, an unpleasant character. Suetonius describes him as detestable in every aspect of his life, accusing him of various cruelties and vices. However, from Agrippina's perspective, the marriage accomplished several important objectives. Most significantly, it produced a son. In December 37 AD, Agrippina gave birth to Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, who would later become Emperor Nero. This son would ultimately become her vehicle for exercising power, though she could not have known this at his birth. Domitius Ahenobarbus died in 40 AD, possibly while Agrippina was in exile following her involvement in the conspiracy against Caligula. His death left Agrippina a wealthy widow. She inherited substantial property and the guardianship of their young son. After her recall from exile in 41 AD, Agrippina's marriage prospects were complicated by her past. She was now associated with conspiracy against an emperor, even though Caligula had been assassinated and his memory condemned. However, she was also descended from Augustus, making her politically valuable to any man seeking imperial connections. Her second marriage was to Gaius Sallustius Crispus Passienus, a wealthy senator who had previously been married to Agrippina's sister Domitia. This marriage brought her additional wealth and restored her position in Roman high society, though ancient sources provide little detail about the relationship. Passienus died in 47 AD, and ancient sources immediately suspected that Agrippina poisoned him to inherit his fortune. This accusation follows the standard pattern of attributing poisoning to ambitious women, and we have no definitive evidence either way. What is clear is that his death left her one of the wealthiest women in Rome, with the financial resources necessary for political maneuvering. Agrippina's marriage to her uncle Claudius in 49 AD represents one of the most controversial and consequential unions in Roman history. Ancient sources portray it as scandalous seduction by an ambitious woman, but careful analysis reveals a more complex political arrangement. Claudius became emperor in 41 AD following Caligula's assassination, despite having no military experience or political career. He had been considered physically and mentally deficient by his family, excluded from public life, and survived previous imperial purges precisely because he was not viewed as a threat. However, Claudius proved to be a more capable administrator than anyone expected. He expanded the empire, conquering Britain in 43 AD, reformed the bureaucracy, and maintained generally stable governance. but he was politically vulnerable, lacking strong support from either the army or the Senate. By 48 AD, Claudius's third wife Messalina had been executed for allegedly plotting against him. Ancient sources describe her as sexually insatiable and politically reckless, though these characterizations follow familiar patterns of misogynistic historical writing. Whatever the truth about Messalina, her death left Claudius without a wife and the imperial succession uncertain. Agrippina saw opportunity in this situation. She was now about 33 years old, politically experienced, and possessed the best Julio-Claudian bloodline of any available woman. More importantly, she had a son who could serve as Claudius's heir, solving the emperor's succession problem. The major obstacle was that marriage between uncle and niece was considered incestuous under Roman law and custom. Claudius would need to change the law to marry Agrippina, a step that would be controversial and potentially damage his relationship with the Senate. Tacitus provides detailed accounts of the political maneuvering that led to the marriage. He describes Agrippina using her beauty and her access to Claudius. As his niece, she could visit him without impropriety to seduce him. However, Tacitus also notes the political calculations involved. Agrippina's son Domitius could be adopted by Claudius, providing an heir with both Julio-Claudian blood and political legitimacy. The marriage required Senate approval to change the incest laws. Agrippina's supporters in the Senate, particularly the imperial freedman Pallas, who was allegedly Agrippina's lover, according to hostile sources, orchestrated a campaign presenting the marriage as politically necessary for imperial stability. The Senate approved the legal change in 49 AD, and Claudius married Agrippina in a lavish ceremony. Ancient sources emphasize that this was unprecedented. No emperor had married his niece, and few had married women of such distinguished lineage and personal ambition. Almost immediately, Agrippina began accumulating powers and honors that no Roman woman had previously held. She received the title Augusta, which had been granted to only a few imperial women before her. She appeared on coins alongside Claudius, in some cases positioned equally rather than subordinately. She attended Senate meetings, though from behind a curtain, as women were not officially allowed in the Senate chamber. Most significantly, she successfully maneuvered to have her son adopted by Claudius in 50 AD. Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus became Nero Claudius Caesar, instantly becoming heir to the throne ahead of Claudius's biological son Britannicus. The 5 years of Agrippina's marriage to Claudius saw her exercise political power more openly than any Roman woman before her. Understanding both what she achieved and the limits she faced reveals much about gender and power in the Roman Empire. The title Augusta had been granted to few women before Agrippina, most notably Livia, Augustus's wife, and Antonia Minor, Claudius's mother. But Agrippina used the title more actively than her predecessors, appearing in public ceremonies, receiving foreign delegations, and participating in government in ways that shocked traditional Romans. Numismatic evidence from this period is particularly revealing. Coins from 50 to 54 AD show Agrippina's image alongside Claudius's, sometimes on equal terms, rather than in the subordinate position typically occupied by imperial women. Some coins show her wearing a crown similar to the emperor's, blurring the distinction between male imperial authority and female status. Archaeological evidence from the imperial palace on the Palatine Hill shows modifications made during this period that may have been designed to accommodate Agrippina's political activities. Separate reception rooms and administrative spaces suggest she was conducting official business independently of Claudius. Ancient sources describe Agrippina as effectively co-ruling with Claudius, though the precise division of authority is difficult to determine. Tacitus claims she attended Senate meetings hidden behind a curtain, able to hear proceedings, but not officially present. Whether this actually occurred or represents Tacitus's way of expressing his disapproval of her influence is debatable. What is clear is that Agrippina built a network of supporters who owed their positions to her favor. She promoted Seneca the Younger, recalled from exile to serve as Nero's tutor, Burrus, appointed as Praetorian prefect, and various other figures who would support her son's eventual succession. She also ruthlessly eliminated perceived threats. Ancient sources accuse her of orchestrating the deaths of several people who either opposed her power or might challenge Nero's succession. These accusations include poisoning Marcus Junius Silanus, a potential rival to Nero, and arranging the exile or execution of other political opponents. The extent to which these accusations are true, versus reflecting the standard rhetoric used against powerful women, remains debated. Poisoning was the crime routinely attributed to ambitious women because it was viewed as a feminine form of murder, secretive, indirect, and relying on domestic access rather than physical force. What cannot be disputed is that Agrippina successfully positioned her son as Claudius's heir ahead of his biological son Britannicus. This achievement required sophisticated political maneuvering, including managing Claudius's perceptions, building coalitions of support, and neutralizing opposition. Her success challenged fundamental assumptions about gender and power in Roman society. The fact that a woman could accumulate and exercise such authority, even if technically acting through male proxies, demonstrated that the formal legal exclusion of women from politics did not entirely prevent female political agency. On October 13, 54 AD, Emperor Claudius died after eating mushrooms at a family dinner. Ancient sources immediately suspected poisoning, with Agrippina as the obvious suspect. This accusation has been accepted as historical fact by most popular accounts, but careful examination of the evidence reveals significant uncertainty. Our primary source for the poisoning allegation is Tacitus, who presents it as established fact, while acknowledging some uncertainty about details. He describes Agrippina arranging for poisoned mushrooms to be served to Claudius, knowing they were his favorite food. When the first dose proved insufficient, Tacitus claims a poisoned feather was used to induce vomiting, delivering a more concentrated dose of toxin. Suetonius provides a similar account, but with different details, suggesting he was drawing on gossip and rumor rather than definitive evidence. Cassius Dio, writing much later, accepts the poisoning story, but adds additional embellishments that suggest legendary development rather than historical memory. Several factors make the poisoning accusation plausible. Agrippina had clear motives. Claudius was reportedly reconsidering the succession and possibly planning to restore his biological son Britannicus as heir instead of Nero. Ancient sources suggest Claudius had grown weary of Agrippina's influence and was beginning to resist her control. The timing was also suspicious. Nero had just turned 17, the minimum age for holding imperial power, making him eligible to become emperor. Delaying even a few months might have allowed Claudius to change succession plans or for other complications to arise. However, alternative explanations exist. Claudius was 63 years old, elderly by Roman standards, and had suffered from various health problems throughout his life. Ancient sources describe physical disabilities, speech impediments, and various ailments that could have been symptoms of chronic illness. His death from natural causes would not have been surprising. Modern medical historians have noted that mushroom poisoning typically produces rapid symptoms, severe gastrointestinal distress within hours of consumption. Ancient sources describe Claudius dying overnight after the dinner, which is consistent with mushroom poisoning, but also consistent with other causes of sudden death. The feather story raises additional questions. Inducing vomiting was a common practice after Roman banquets, and it's unclear how a second dose of poison could be administered this way without detection. The detail may represent an attempt to explain why the poisoning took hours to be fatal, rather than being immediately obvious. From Agrippina's perspective, poisoning Claudius was extremely risky, even if she wanted him dead. A failed attempt would have been disastrous, and even a successful one risked exposure if the succession didn't proceed smoothly. She had already achieved her primary objective of positioning Nero as heir. Killing Claudius prematurely might have been unnecessary and dangerous. What we can say with confidence is that Agrippina moved immediately to secure power after Claudius's death. She prevented news of his death from spreading until Nero could be presented to the Praetorian Guard. She coordinated with Burrus to ensure military support, and she managed the Senate's recognition of Nero as emperor. This efficient coup suggests careful planning, whether or not it included murder. The accusation of poisoning served important political purposes for Agrippina's later enemies. It delegitimized Nero's succession, portrayed Agrippina as monstrous, and provided justification for her eventual elimination. These motivations don't prove the accusation false, but they remind us that ancient accounts were shaped by political agendas rather than disinterested pursuit of truth. When 17-year-old Nero became emperor in 54 AD, Agrippina appeared to have achieved her ultimate objective, power over the Roman Empire, exercised through her son. The first months of Nero's reign seemed to confirm her dominance, but the relationship would quickly deteriorate in ways that suggest the complexity of both figures. Nero's accession was carefully orchestrated by Agrippina, Burrus, and Seneca. The young emperor was presented to the Praetorian Guard, who acclaimed him in exchange for substantial bonuses. The Senate, presented with a fait accompli, officially recognized Nero as Claudius's successor and deified the dead emperor. Agrippina's position in the early months was unprecedented. Ancient sources describe her as virtually co-ruling with Nero, receiving foreign ambassadors, attending meetings, and making decisions about appointments and policy. Coins from early 54 AD show her portrait alongside Nero's, often positioned on the obverse front of the coin rather than the reverse, suggesting equal or even superior status. However, tensions emerged almost immediately. Nero, despite his youth, proved resistant to being controlled by his mother. He had been carefully educated by Seneca in rhetoric, philosophy, and statecraft, giving him intellectual resources to challenge Agrippina's directives. He also had the support of Seneca and Burrus, who sought to reduce Agrippina's influence and establish their own control over the young emperor. The first major conflict concerned Nero's personal relationships. He became involved with Claudia Acte, a freed woman, former slave, which both violated social norms and threatened Agrippina's control. Tacitus describes Agrippina's rage at this relationship and her attempts to separate Nero from Acte through various means. More significantly, Nero began making decisions independently and excluding Agrippina from meetings and deliberations. By 55 AD, less than a year into his reign, her position had declined noticeably. New coins showed her on the reverse side, subordinate to Nero's image. She was gradually excluded from official ceremonies, and her recommendations for appointments were increasingly ignored. The murder of Britannicus in 55 AD marked a crucial turning point. Claudius's biological son, now 14 years old, represented a potential alternative emperor if Nero's rule faltered. Ancient sources unanimously attribute his poisoning to Nero, though they differ on whether Agrippina supported, opposed, or was unaware of the decision. Tacitus provides the most detailed account, describing Britannicus dying during a dinner party after drinking poisoned wine. The poison allegedly concocted by Locusta, a professional poisoner, killed him so rapidly that guests immediately suspected assassination. Nero reportedly claimed it was an epileptic fit, but few believed this explanation. If Agrippina had previously eliminated threats to Nero's power, her son was now demonstrating that he could murder rivals independently. This both validated her own methods and threatened her safety. If Nero would kill his adopted brother, he might eventually kill his mother. Over the next few years, the relationship continued deteriorating. Agrippina was moved from the palace to a separate residence, reducing her access to Nero and ending the fiction of co-rule. Her supporters were systematically removed from positions of influence, replaced by Nero's own appointees. Ancient sources describe increasing conflict, with Agrippina alternately threatening to support other claimants to the throne and attempting to reconcile with her son. These threats may have been empty. She had no real power base independent of Nero, but they convinced him that she remained dangerous. By 59 AD, Nero had apparently decided that his mother must die. Ancient sources describe an elaborately planned assassination that involved theatrical spectacle, multiple backup plans, and ultimately brutal directness when subtlety failed. The occasion was the festival of Minerva at Baiae, a resort town on the Bay of Naples, where wealthy Romans maintained vacation villas. Nero invited Agrippina to join him for the celebrations, apparently reconciling with her after years of tension. Ancient sources describe their meeting as warm and affectionate, with Nero displaying filial devotion that seemed to signal restored relations. However, according to Tacitus and other sources, Nero had arranged for a specially designed ship that would collapse in the middle of the bay, drowning Agrippina while making her death appear accidental. The ship was constructed with a collapsible cabin and a lead-weighted roof designed to crush anyone inside when triggered. The plan displayed both ingenuity and absurdity. On one hand, it might conceal murder as accident. On the other hand, the elaborate mechanism could fail or be discovered, and Agrippina was an excellent swimmer despite being about 44 years old. Ancient sources describe the assassination attempt in dramatic detail. After dinner with Nero, Agrippina boarded the ship to return to her villa. As the vessel reached the middle of the bay, the collapse mechanism was triggered. The cabin roof fell as designed, but it killed Agrippina's companion, Acheronia Pulla, instead of Agrippina herself. Acheronia made a fatal mistake. She called out that she was Agrippina, apparently hoping to be rescued first. The sailors, realizing their target had survived, beat her to death with oars. Meanwhile, the real Agrippina, understanding that this was assassination rather than accident, remained silent and swam to shore. The failure of the elaborate plot left Nero in a difficult position. Agrippina had survived and presumably understood that her son had tried to kill her. She sent a messenger to inform Nero that she had survived the shipwreck, and ancient sources describe the young emperor's panic at this news. Nero, Seneca, and Burrus held an emergency conference to decide how to proceed. The pretense of accident had failed, leaving them with three options: abandon the assassination attempt and try to reconcile with Agrippina. Risky, as she now knew he had tried to kill her, attempt another elaborate scheme, or simply have her killed directly. They chose the third option. Nero ordered Tacitus, the commander of the fleet at Misenum, to take soldiers to Agrippina's villa and kill her. The direct approach abandoned any pretense of accident or natural causes, but it ensured the job would be completed. Tacitus's account of Agrippina's death is one of the most famous passages in ancient historiography, combining eyewitness detail with dramatic power. Whether his version is entirely accurate or partially romanticized remains debated, but it has shaped how Agrippina is remembered for 2 millennia. According to Tacitus, Agrippina was at her villa near Baiae when Tacitus and his soldiers arrived. She had returned from the bay, treated her injuries from the shipwreck, and presumably understood that Nero would make another attempt on her life. When soldiers surrounded her residence, her few remaining attendants fled. Agrippina reportedly remained calm, sending a message to Nero asking him to either visit her himself or send different messengers, as she did not trust Tacitus. As the soldiers broke into her chambers, Agrippina faced them with remarkable composure, according to ancient sources. When they approached with weapons drawn, she reportedly pointed to her womb and said, "Strike here," the womb that had carried the emperor who now sought her death. This final statement, if authentic, represents extraordinary dramatic presence and rhetorical skill. Even facing death, Agrippina found words that would resonate through history, transforming her assassination into a commentary on the corruption of maternal love by political ambition and the ultimate ingratitude of power. The soldiers killed her with multiple stab wounds. Her body was cremated that same night on a dining couch without the elaborate funeral rites appropriate for her rank. Nero, according to ancient sources, viewed his mother's body before cremation, commenting on her beauty even in death. News of Agrippina's death caused various reactions throughout the empire. The Senate officially thanked the gods for Nero's deliverance from his mother's plots, accepting his claim that she had been conspiring against him. The common people, however, were reportedly less convinced, and rumors of matricide immediately began circulating. Modern historians have debated how much of Tacitus's account is accurate versus romanticized. The final words attributed to Agrippina may be his invention, designed to create a dramatically satisfying scene and emphasize the moral dimensions of the assassination. However, the basic facts that Nero ordered her killed, that the elaborate shipwreck plot failed, and that soldiers eventually murdered her directly are confirmed by multiple independent sources. Assessing Agrippina's character and career requires navigating between the hostile ancient sources that portray her as monstrous and modern revisionist interpretations that present her purely as a victim of patriarchal oppression and misogynistic historical writing. The case against Agrippina, as presented by ancient sources, is extensive. She is accused of poisoning Claudius, eliminating political rivals, committing incest with her son, and exercising illegitimate power through manipulation and murder. These accusations, repeated across multiple sources, have created an image of Agrippina as one of history's most ruthless political operators. However, careful analysis reveals problems with many accusations. The incest claim appears only in Tacitus, and even he presents it as rumor rather than established fact. He suggests Agrippina may have attempted to seduce Nero to maintain control over him, but he provides no definitive evidence. The story follows standard patterns of using sexual scandal to discredit powerful women. The poisoning accusations are more complex. Agrippina likely was responsible for some deaths. This was how Roman imperial politics operated. The question is whether she was more ruthless than male political operators of her era, or whether her actions are merely described in more sensational terms because of her gender. Modern historians like Anthony Barrett and Judith Ginsburg have argued that Agrippina's political methods were not fundamentally different from those of male imperial family members, but that ancient sources applied different moral standards based on gender. Actions that would be described as political acumen in men become manipulation when performed by women. The archaeological and material evidence provides some balance to literary sources. Agrippina was clearly a capable administrator who promoted competent officials and pursued rational policies. Her patronage of Seneca and Burrus suggests political judgment rather than simple ruthlessness. The successful transition to Nero's rule demonstrates organizational skill. Her building projects and civic benefactions show conventional imperial munificence. She founded a colony, Colonia Claudia Ara Agrippinensium, modern Cologne, in the region of her birth, established temples, and supported various public works. These actions demonstrate participation in traditional forms of imperial legitimacy. The most balanced assessment might recognize Agrippina as an exceptionally capable political operator, working within a system that officially excluded women from power. She accumulated and exercised authority through methods that were probably no more ruthless than those of male competitors, but which violated gender norms and therefore generated particular moral condemnation. Her ultimate failure, being killed by the son she had elevated to power, reflects both her success and its limits. She had maneuvered Nero onto the throne, but could not control him once he possessed independent power. Her assumption that maternal authority would translate into political dominance proved fatal. Agrippina's story illuminates broader questions about how women could exercise power in ancient Rome despite formal legal and cultural exclusions from political life. Understanding these mechanisms helps explain both her achievements and the limitations she faced. Roman law granted women remarkably few rights compared to men. They could not vote, hold office, or conduct independent legal business without male guardianship. Married women were under the legal authority of their husbands, while unmarried women required guardians to conduct official transactions. However, these formal restrictions did not entirely prevent female political agency. Wealthy aristocratic women like Agrippina could accumulate considerable informal power through several mechanisms. First, property rights provided economic independence. While women needed male guardians for legal transactions, they could own substantial property in their own right. Agrippina inherited wealth from her father, her first husband, and Claudius, giving her financial resources that translated into political influence. Second, family connections provided access to power. As daughter of Germanicus, sister of Caligula, wife of Claudius, and mother of Nero, Agrippina had intimate access to 4 emperors. This proximity allowed her to influence decisions even when she couldn't make them directly. Third, patronage networks extended female influence beyond the household. Agrippina cultivated relationships with senators, imperial freedmen, and military commanders who owed their positions to her support. These networks allowed her to affect outcomes without formally holding office. Fourth, religious authority provided public visibility. Women could hold positions as Vestal virgins or priestesses of various cults, giving them official roles in public ceremonies. Agrippina's title as Augusta carried religious significance that legitimized her public presence. However, these mechanisms of informal power always remained precarious and dependent on male cooperation or tolerance. Agrippina's power existed only as long as Nero accepted or was unable to resist it. Once he decided to assert independence, she had no formal authority to fall back on. The misogynistic rhetoric applied to her by ancient historians also reveals cultural anxieties about female political power. The accusations of sexual manipulation, poisoning, and illegitimate influence reflect male discomfort with women exercising authority that officially belonged exclusively to men. Archaeological discoveries related to Agrippina provide material evidence that can be evaluated independently of literary sources, offering different perspectives on her life and influence. The most significant archaeological evidence comes from coins minted during her lifetime. Numismatic evidence from 50 to 54 AD shows Agrippina's image appearing alongside Claudius, with unprecedented prominence. Some coins show her on the obverse front rather than reverse, suggesting equal rather than subordinate status. This material evidence confirms literary accounts of her exceptional position during Claudius's final years. Coins from early in Nero's reign similarly show Agrippina prominently featured, though her position gradually becomes more subordinate as the reign progresses. This numismatic record provides a visual timeline of her declining power that complements literary accounts. The colony she founded, Colonia Claudia Ara Agrippinensium, modern Cologne, provides extensive archaeological evidence of her patronage and influence. Excavations have revealed substantial Roman construction from the mid-1st century AD, including public buildings, infrastructure, and inscriptions that reference her as founder. This provides concrete evidence of her administrative capabilities and political influence extending beyond Rome itself. Excavations at the imperial palaces on the Palatine Hill in Rome have revealed architectural modifications from the Claudian period that may reflect Agrippina's elevated status. Separate reception areas and administrative spaces suggest she conducted official business independently, though definitively connecting specific rooms to her is challenging given centuries of later construction. Inscriptions mentioning Agrippina have been found throughout the empire, particularly in the eastern provinces, where emperor worship was common. These inscriptions typically honor her as Augusta and mother of the emperor, providing evidence of how she was officially represented in different regions. Some inscriptions show signs of later erasure or modification following her death, evidence of damnatio memoria, the official condemnation of memory that typically involved destroying images and removing names from public monuments. However, this erasure was less systematic than for some other condemned figures, suggesting complex attitudes toward her legacy. Sculptural portraits identified as Agrippina exist in various museums, though attributions are sometimes uncertain. These portraits show her in traditional Roman matron style, emphasizing dignified respectability rather than any threatening qualities ancient writers attributed to her. The artistic representation contrasts with literary portrayals, suggesting different audiences and purposes. Recent underwater archaeology in the Bay of Naples has explored the area around Baiae where Agrippina died. While no definitive physical evidence of the assassination has been found, the excavations have revealed the luxury villa culture of this resort region, providing context for understanding the social world in which her death occurred. Agrippina's immediate legacy was shaped by Nero's propagandistic needs after her assassination. He claimed she had been plotting against him, justifying her death as necessary for his survival and the empire's stability. The Senate officially accepted this narrative, though popular opinion may have been more skeptical. However, Nero's own decline and eventual suicide in 68 AD complicated this legacy. As his reputation deteriorated, Agrippina could be portrayed as either his creator, responsible for elevating a monster, or his victim, destroyed by the ungrateful son she had made emperor. Ancient historians adopted the first interpretation, making her share responsibility for Nero's crimes. The Flavian dynasty that succeeded Nero had political reasons to emphasize both Nero's and Agrippina's wickedness, as this legitimized the Flavian claim to power by contrasting their virtue with Julio-Claudian vice. This political context influenced how Tacitus and other historians of the period portrayed her. Medieval and Renaissance writers who encountered ancient accounts generally accepted the negative portrayal without question. Agrippina became a standard example of female political ambition, leading to disaster, used in moral literature warning about women who exceeded their proper roles. Modern feminist scholarship, beginning in the late 20th century, has attempted to reassess Agrippina, questioning the misogynistic biases in ancient sources, and recognizing her as a skilled political operator working within severe constraints. This revisionist approach has produced more sympathetic portraits, but also risks overcorrecting by ignoring evidence of genuine ruthlessness. Agrippina the Younger remains one of history's most controversial female figures, precisely because her story raises fundamental questions about gender, power, and historical truth that remain unresolved 2 millennia later. Was she a monster who poisoned her way to power and destroyed everyone who challenged her ambition? Was she a victim of patriarchal propaganda, her legitimate political actions distorted by misogynistic historians? Or was she something more complex, a capable and ruthless political operator whose methods were not fundamentally different from male contemporaries, but whose gender made those methods particularly threatening to the social order? The honest answer is that we cannot know with certainty. Our sources are hostile, biased by gender assumptions, and written decades after her death by authors with political reasons to portray her negatively. The archaeological evidence confirms her exceptional position, but cannot tell us about her character or specific actions. What we can say is that Agrippina achieved political power unprecedented for a Roman woman, manipulated succession to place her son on the throne, and ruled effectively through him until he decided to assert independence. Whether this makes her admirable, monstrous, or simply human depends partly on values we bring to historical interpretation. Her story reminds us that history is not objective truth, but interpretation shaped by the perspectives and prejudices of those who record it. The same actions described as political skill in men become manipulation in women. The same willingness to eliminate rivals is decisiveness in male rulers, but cruelty in female ones. Understanding Agrippina requires recognizing both her genuine agency and the constraints she faced, both her real political achievements and the systematic biases that shaped how those achievements were recorded. She was neither pure victim nor pure villain, but a complex historical actor whose story illuminates the possibilities and limits of female power in patriarchal societies. The final irony is that she succeeded in her primary objective. Her son became emperor, but this success led directly to her death. The power she accumulated could exist only through male proxies, and once those proxies asserted independence, she had no formal authority to fall back on. This fundamental vulnerability proved fatal. Agrippina's legacy endures, not because we can definitively judge her character, but because her story poses questions that remain relevant. How do we evaluate women who pursue power in systems designed to exclude them? How should historians handle sources systematically biased by gender? What methods are legitimate for those denied access to formal authority? These questions have no easy answers, making Agrippina the Younger a figure who continues to challenge us across the vast distance of 2 millennia.